Well, one of the things that the Zohar talks about is the nature of soul, and that while our bodies have a limited, finite existence in terms of the 80, 90 years or so that people live in this world, the soul continues even after the body dies. And the Zohar describes this in various passages, both in terms of illness that leads to death. Often you'll find people who are very ill don't have to eat much. And the Zohar will say because the soul is stronger than the body at that sense. When the body is stronger than the soul, the appetite is healthy and hearty. When the person is close to death, then the body is diminished, so it doesn't need as much food. The soul is what is there, not so much the body. And then, before a person dies, the Zohar describes that first the relatives of the person gather to welcome the person, the soul, and then to make it easier for the person to actually leave their body, they see the Shekhinah, the divine presence, comes to meet them. And at the moment of death, it's actually a spiritual moment, not a moment of pain, but a moment of transition from a physical reality to a more spiritual reality. Later on, the soul will have to deal with judgment in terms of kind of the karma of what the person has accomplished for good or negative in this world. But initially, the soul experiences divine bliss. And then, after the death, there's a period of separation anxiety that you could say that the soul has because it's so used to being embodied. It's so used to being with its body. It was one. We don't see ourselves as a body and a soul. We just see ourselves as John or Mark or Moshe. And with death comes that separation. So initially there's this fright, and then there's a calming to some degree, but it's still tense, but it's not completely scattered. And then further with time, with the passage of time, the soul is acclimated into its spiritual reality in its plane, in its non-physical plane, and then is at peace with itself and its new surroundings. That's where Jewish mourning practice is seen in that light. So it's not just that the mourner needs to have a ritual in order to remember or pay tribute to a deceased relative, but rather it's to mirror the anguish and pain that the soul of the deceased is going through. That's why when a person dies, before the burial, Jewish practice says that the relatives are called an onain. They're in mourning, but it's not a state of mourning that you could even comfort them. You're not even supposed to visit them to offer them comfort for the most part then, because that only happens after the dead is buried. The reason being that the soul of that deceased relative is in such distress that there's no comforting it. So you parallel how you would or not be able to comfort the soul by how you would or not comfort the mourners. In this case, you just let them prepare for the funeral. Then once the burial takes place, you comfort them. That's because now that the body is buried, the soul is somewhat more calmed. But then after the 7-day period of mourning goes on, so the mourning period is diminished, and the mourners get up from their mourning, but there is a slight state of mourning for the full 30 days. That's because the soul, after 7 days, ascends even higher into heaven. And then after the 30 days, again, it's less affected by the pain, the psychic pain of having lived in a body. And then after a year, the yahrzeit that we celebrate the anniversary of a person's death, we believe the soul is in paradise and you don't have to say Kaddish anymore, things like that. So that's the ascent of the soul that happens after death is paralleled by ritual of how a person sits Shiva, mourns for the 7 days, the 30-day period, and for the full year. That's paralleling where the soul is on its kind of reacclimation into a spiritual universe.